In the quiet moments between responsibilities and recognition, there's a warmth that moves through a woman's chest, not loud, not dramatic, but tender, like sunlight falling on the smallest sprout, just beginning to reach for the sky. It doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives, and in its presence, a smile begins to rise. Not the one worn for cameras or colleagues, but a private one, born from something far deeper. This smile, though unseen, is sacred. It is the voice of a part of her that never stopped believing, even when she did. It is the smile of the inner child, the one who once laughed before she learned to hide it, who painted clouds before she feared criticism, who danced freely before someone told her to sit still and be polite. For all the women who have collected accolades, built empires, and gained admiration, why is it that belief in self still feels like a fragile flame? The answer does not lie in external pairs. It lies in the voice of that forgotten child, still waiting to be heard. Carl Jung understood that the soul is not a flat surface, but a landscape with many terrains. One of the most powerful being the archetype of the child. He didn't see this child as a memory, but as a living principle, an inner figure, encoded in the collective psyche of every human being. Jung called it a psychic organ, something essential to the structure of the personality itself. Just as lungs belong to the body, the inner child belongs to the soul. Without it, the spirit suffocates. This child, Jung taught, holds the key to wholeness. She is the part of us that remains curious, intuitive, and untouched by cynicism. She is not immature. She is primal. She is original. Her presence is not a regression, but an invitation to return to something honest, something pure. In every woman, no matter how experienced, this eternal child lives on, not completed, not gone, but asking for care, for voice, for integration. To decode the inner child is to look beneath the polished layers we wear each day, the heels, the titles, the emails, and ask, who was I before the world told me who to be? The child archetype is not childishness. It is the foundation. It is where imagination lives, where deep emotion first took form, where we learn to feel before we learn to hide. Jung said, in every adult there lurks a child, an eternal child, something that is always becoming, never completed. That part of you is not gone. It's waiting. And the more we deny it, the more our confidence feels unstable. Because confidence without connection to the child is performance, not power. Every myth, every sacred story, whether Peter Pan, the child gods of ancient myth, or the holy infants in religious paintings, echoes this archetype. The child stands for new beginnings, for essence, for untamed truth. Sometimes the call of the child is subtle, a childhood song playing in a store, a breeze that smells like summer, a butterfly that lands on your shoulder just as you begin to feel overwhelmed. These are not coincidences, they are invitations, invitations to pause, to listen, to feel what your thinking mind has buried. That flutter in your chest, that lump in your throat, it's not weakness, it's your soul trying to reach you. When the inner child is forgotten, life may still move forward, but without rhythm, joy becomes fleeting. Laughter feels forced, and creativity dries up. One woman, a painter by trade, shared how after years of pleasing clients, her work felt mechanical, until one afternoon, she opened an old tin of crayons. On impulse, she doodled a smiling face. It was rough, simple, but something cracked open. Her heart quickened, her hands moved freely. That little act, childish as it seemed, brought her art back to life. This is how the inner child works. Not through logic, but through feeling. Not through plans, but through symbols. Jung taught that the unconscious speaks in image and emotion, and the child is its first language. When we stop understanding that language, we begin to live only from the neck up, detached from the depths that gave us meaning in the first place. The child archetype is not formed solely from your personal memories. It lives in the collective unconscious, the shared heritage of human feeling and experience. When you read fairy tales, when you look at a painting of Madonna and Child, when you hear a nursery rhyme that makes you unexpectedly tear up, you are not regressing. You are remembering. You are aligning with something older than culture. You are returning. Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The inner child is part of that unconscious force. If she is silenced, she will still move through you, but with confusion and pain. But if you turn toward her, even quietly, even with just a whisper of attention, you begin to change the script. You begin to choose rather than be driven. You don't have to make a dramatic gesture. You can start with this. Sit for a moment and ask yourself, what would my younger self need to hear today? Then say it. In your mind. Out loud. In a letter. Dance with no reason. Let yourself cry, without needing to justify it. Each of these actions opens a door. Each one is an act of coming home. And when that smile returns, not the one shaped for photos, but the one that blooms without warning, you'll know something has shifted. Not because you forced it, but because you remembered. Confidence, real confidence, begins when we no longer hide from the child within us, when we embrace her as the oldest truth of who we are. After the first encounter with the child within, something stirs. It's not always loud. Often, it's a hush, a quiet knowing that something essential has been awakened. You begin to realize that confidence isn't built the way the world told you. It doesn't come from climbing ladders or crafting flawless sentences. It doesn't arrive with applause or a nameplate. Real confidence comes from tenderness, from returning to a part of you that was never broken to begin with. Carl Jung taught that wholeness doesn't come from building a perfect self. It comes from integrating what we've left behind. And there is no part more often abandoned than the sensitive child, the one who once felt deeply, trusted freely, and played without shame. When we invite her back into our daily life, something remarkable happens. Confidence rises, not as armor, but as presence, as a quiet, grounded light. Think of confidence not as a performance, but as a blooming. A garden does not shout when it blossoms. It simply rises when conditions are right. The soil must be soft. The water must be gentle. The light must be consistent. The soul is no different. When a woman creates the right conditions, acceptance, warmth, patience, her inner child begins to bloom. And that bloom becomes confidence that cannot be taken or imitated. When this child is neglected, however, the unconscious begins to lead in quiet sabotage. Jung warned us that the parts of the psyche we reject will not disappear. They will act through us, uninvited. A woman who feels small when she speaks, who doubts herself in moments where she should lead, is not flawed. She is simply carrying a child who never felt safe. And that child, still waiting for reassurance, holds back her power from within. But when that child is welcomed, when her sadness is allowed, when her joy is honored, when her tears are not rushed away, something shifts. One woman shared how, after writing a single letter to her younger self, her voice changed. Literally, she no longer trembled when speaking at work. Her words no longer raced. She said it felt like standing on steady ground for the first time. Because when the child inside feels seen, the adult becomes rooted. Jung reminded us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. What darkness is more neglected than the hidden pain of our earliest wound, and what light is more needed than the glow that returns when we forgive that part of ourselves for being scared, needy, or too much. That forgiveness is not weakness, it's restoration. Many women live between two identities, the one the world praises, and the one they hide. They may appear accomplished, articulate, even graceful, but inside they fear exposure. Why? because their confidence was never built on wholeness. It was built on survival, and the child within, sensing the fragility of that foundation, keeps trembling. But the moment you let yourself be human, truly human, everything begins to settle. When you cry without rushing, laugh without planning, rest without guilt, you are sending a signal to the child inside, "You are safe with me now." And she responds, not in words, but in feeling, in radiance, in steadiness. The spine lifts, the eyes brighten, the voice deepens. You become more you. Have you ever spent time simply writing to the version of you who once needed someone? Try it. Write to the girl who didn't know how to ask for affection, who got good grades to be loved, who smiled when she wanted to scream. Speak to her. Let her speak back. Jung would say this is the essence of active imagination, a sacred dialogue between the conscious and unconscious. It is not make-believe, it is soul repair. One executive woman told me that after doing this simple act for a week, writing to her younger self, her chronic fear of public speaking vanished. What left her speechless before now felt like space to express. She didn't rehearse more, she reconnected more. That's what changed her voice. That's what made her visible to herself again. When we bring the unconscious into the light, our lives begin to make sense. The fears we couldn't name before are now whispers we understand. The hesitations we once judged become signals of where we need love. The shame we carried loses its grip, and in its place grows something durable. Trust. Not trust in the world, but trust in ourselves. And that trust becomes the root of true feminine confidence. Not the kind built on control or comparison, but the kind that blooms quietly and powerfully from within. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to earn it. When the child feels safe, the woman can rise. So ask yourself, gently, when was the last time I laughed without thinking? When did I last cry without apology? What did I love doing before anyone told me who to be? The answers are not trivial. They are sacred coordinates, and they point to a home inside you that never stopped waiting. Confidence doesn't begin at the podium. It begins in the quiet decision to stop abandoning yourself. It begins the moment you say, "I'm here. I see you. I won't leave again." And from that vow, a new kind of strength is born. One that doesn't need to be loud to be real. One that glows from the inside out. There comes a moment in a woman's life when, despite outward calm, something begins to harden inside her. It doesn't happen overnight. It's quiet, almost invisible. But slowly, the light behind her eyes dims. Her laughter becomes less spontaneous. Her responses feel practiced, and though no one sees it, she knows something is missing. This is what happens when the inner child goes unheard. Carl Jung warned us that the unconscious will not remain silent forever. What we refuse to face within ourselves will surface through discomfort, misalignment, and illness of the soul. The inner child does not disappear. She retreats into the shadows, behind the curtain of competence and control. And in her absence, life becomes mechanical, stripped of the wonder that once made it beautiful. When this inner child is left alone for too long, self-doubt begins to take root in the most hidden corners of our psyche. Women begin to second-guess every word, shrink from confrontation, or overextend themselves to avoid disapproval. But this is not a flaw of character. It is a symptom of separation. The child within, who once felt powerless or dismissed, has not been healed, only silent. Jung observed that most people would rather project their pain outward or distract themselves endlessly than sit with their inner world. He said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their souls." And it's true. We try new diets, chase new routines, bury ourselves in spirituality that keeps us busy but not connected. But the truth remains. If the child is not seen, she will suffer. This suffering shows up in subtle ways. A woman who appears successful may find herself constantly overwhelmed. Another may feel numb in her relationships, unable to trust or open her heart. Someone else may be praised for her strength, but secretly struggle to sleep, haunted by the feeling that she's pretending. These are not personality quirks. They are the cry of the forgotten child, echoing through adult life. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. It helps us survive. But when the mask becomes too tight, when we forget there's a self behind it, we begin to lose vitality. The child doesn't care for masks. She asks only for honesty. She does not want us to perform. She wants us to remember. And when we don't, her pain begins to surface in our most vulnerable moments. We avoid eye contact during meetings. Our voices crack when trying to speak up. We stay silent even when our boundaries are being crossed. It's not because we're weak, it's because the part of us that should be speaking has been muted for too long. You might notice it in your posture. Shoulders that tense at the sound of criticism. Eyes that drop when complimented. A breath that never seems to reach the belly. These are all signs that the child inside no longer feels safe. Her silence becomes the source of our stagnation. Her abandonment turns confidence into performance. Jung once said that whatever is repressed will return in the places we are most sensitive. The longer we deny the child within, the more she shows up, not as joy, but as fatigue, not as laughter, but as anxiety. And eventually, we find ourselves existing, but not living, functioning, but not feeling. Many women find themselves asking, why does everything feel heavy, even when things are going well? The answer lies not in circumstance, but in connection. You can be surrounded by love and still feel lonely if the child within you hasn't been embraced. You can be praised and still feel like an imposter if the inner child still thinks she's invisible. And then, one day, without warning, the body speaks what the mind has silenced. A breakdown. A sudden emotional outburst. A deep need to escape. These are the final signals. Not of failure, but of a soul asking to be reclaimed. Of the child knocking on the door, asking, "Do you still remember me?" This is not the end. It is the invitation to pause, to listen, to begin again. You do not need to solve it all today, but you must be willing to open the door, to ask, gently and without judgment, what part of me have I left behind? And what does she need? The healing begins not with solutions, but with presence. Sit with the ache. Let the tears rise without reason. Allow the memories to unfold, even if they tremble, and know that every crack in your armor is a place where light wants to enter. Your child is not here to shame you. She is here to bring you back to life. Once you've felt the silence of a forgotten inner child, the question isn't whether she matters, it's how to reach her again. The path isn't made of perfection or performance. It begins with softness. Carl Jung reminded us. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The child lives in that darkness, not because she is broken, but because she was hidden to protect her. Now we return with light, not to fix, but to sit beside her. Begin with imagination, not as fantasy, but as sacred access to what Jung called the living symbol. In a quiet moment, close your eyes and picture yourself as a child, not in a posed photograph, but in motion, in feeling. See the clothes, the eyes, the expression. Is she curious? Is she scared? Is she waiting? Ask her gently, "What do you need today?" And then listen. Don't analyze. Let the answer come like a breeze through the trees. You might be surprised by what you hear. Perhaps she needs a hug. Or maybe she just wants silence, wants you to stop trying so hard to be everything for everyone. That simple act of meeting her image without judgment begins to bridge the gap between who you've become and who you once were. Each time you return, she steps closer. Each time you pause to listen, she begins to trust again. Jung often used the practice of active imagination, not just to observe the unconscious, but to engage with it. One of the most powerful ways to do this is through letter writing. Take out a pen and write to the little girl you once were. Don't worry about eloquence or grammar. Write what she's waited years to hear. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I see now how much you carried. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Look at a childhood photo if you can. Let your heart speak, not your intellect. A woman once wrote to her 7-year-old self and apologized for always being strong instead of being present. She said, "From now on, I'll stop trying to be perfect. I'll just sit with you." That letter didn't erase her grief, but it opened a doorway. And through that doorway, healing began to rise. After imagination and writing, the next step is affirmation. Not the kind you post on mirrors, but the kind that grows from relationship. Tell your child, "You don't have to earn love anymore. Even when I do nothing, I am still enough." These phrases may feel unfamiliar, even awkward, but every time you speak them, you carve new grooves in the unconscious, replacing the scripts of shame with the voice of love. Jung said, "What you resist persists." So, when old thoughts rise, doubt, fear, the instinct to overachieve, don't fight them. Just speak kindly through them. Tell the child, "I know you're scared. I'm here." Over time, your nervous system begins to settle. And when the child is calm, the adult finally breathes. But healing doesn't live only in the mind. It must move through the body. That's where forgotten joy comes in. What did you love before the world told you to grow up? Dancing in the rain? Drawing faces in the margins of your notebook? Singing at the top of your lungs? These aren't childish distractions. They're doorways. Doorways back to yourself. Jung believed deeply in play. In the Red Book, he wrote about the creative instinct, not as entertainment, but as spiritual necessity. The creation of something new, he said, is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct, acting from inner necessity. So go play. Bake cookies without measuring. Paint with your fingers. Watch clouds without naming them. Let delight return in its simplest forms. One woman who had suppressed her joy for decades finally joined a dance class, something her childhood self had longed for, but was denied. Within weeks, she felt more alive, more decisive, more connected. Not because of the steps, but because of the permission. When I gave that little girl inside me room to move, she said, I stopped needing everyone's approval. I found my own rhythm. Try choosing one day a week as Inner Child Day. Turn off the to-do list. Wear colors you loved as a child. Eat the snack you once adored. Play a game with no score. Sit under a tree and just be. You may feel silly at first. That's okay. Keep going. The child only smiles when your mask softens and your heart leads. You may not see immediate transformation. Healing often hides behind laughter, behind tears, behind long, quiet breaths. But over time, the smile will return. The one that isn't practiced. The one that doesn't ask for permission. It will rise slowly from within, like a flower blooming in the light of safety. And from that smile, confidence will begin to form. Not like a wall, but like a current. A steady, grounded sense that you are allowed to exist, to feel, to speak, to lead, not as a performance, but as your whole self. That is what Jung called individuation, the union of all parts, especially the ones we once exiled. You don't need to be healed to begin. You just need to begin with presence. When you say to the child within, "Today, I will not leave you behind," something shifts in the air around you. You may still doubt. You may still stumble. But beneath it all, something deeper begins to hum. And that hum is the sound of a soul returning to itself. When the smile of the inner child begins to rise again, something subtle but powerful shifts beneath the surface. It's not just the return of joy, It's the beginning of return to self. Not the self shaped by roles, expectations, or ideals, but the one buried beneath it all. Carl Jung called this sacred journey individuation, the process of becoming fully wholly oneself. Individuation is not about achieving perfection. It is not a performance, not a self-help goal, not a competition. It is a quiet, deeply personal transformation that happens when you stop trying to improve yourself and instead start including the parts you've rejected. It's when the strong woman and the scared child no longer fight for space inside you. It's when they sit down beside each other and finally breathe. Jung described individuation as becoming who you truly are. And what makes this so revolutionary is that it has nothing to do with becoming better. It is about becoming true. Imagine peeling off years of labels: ambitious, emotional, too sensitive, too loud, and beneath it all finding the raw, undivided truth of your being. That is individuation. Have you ever felt like you live in two bodies? One that knows what to say in meetings, holds it together at the dinner table, performs strength without hesitation. And then another, smaller voice that whispers in private, "I just want to be held." That split is not weakness. It is a signal, a call to reconcile the inner opposites that have been forced apart. Jung taught that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off what we dislike about ourselves, but by integrating it. You don't need to stop being strong, but you also don't need to silence your vulnerability. You are allowed to be fierce and soft, rational and emotional, joyful and grieving. When you make space for contradiction, you begin to heal the divide. This healing doesn't always look glamorous. Sometimes it looks like crying after years of holding it together. Sometimes it's saying no without explaining yourself. Sometimes it's sitting in silence because you're tired of pretending. Each of these moments, though small, is sacred. Each is a thread in the tapestry of becoming whole. I once heard the story of a young woman who worked as a motivational speaker. She inspired thousands. Yet every time she stepped off stage, she felt empty, hollow, like her words didn't belong to her. In therapy, she was guided to write a letter to the 6-year-old girl inside her, who was once called too much. She didn't just cry. She dreamt of that girl walking beside her in a forest, holding her hand, not asking for anything, just being, and that changed everything. From that day on, her presence on stage was different. She didn't need to inspire. She simply needed to be. And people felt it. Her words landed deeper. Her pauses felt fuller. Her eyes softened, but her power grew. That's what happens when you stop performing strength and start embodying wholeness. Are you living in this split? Do you feel like you have to be one version of yourself in public and another in private? If so, that is your invitation to begin the process of individuation, to stop choosing between the child and the adult, and instead invite both to speak. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And to do that, you must first see what you've disowned. The shy part, the jealous part, the afraid part, the part that wanted love and didn't get it. None of these parts are the enemy. They are fragments of you, exiled only because they weren't welcomed when you first needed them most. When you start to integrate them, not fix them, not hide them, you begin to feel something different. Confidence. Yes, but not the kind that comes from accomplishment, the kind that comes from presence, from knowing that you are no longer divided, that what you feel is aligned with what you express. Jung often used the image of a bell. If the metal inside is not forged properly, no matter how hard you strike it, the sound will be dull. But if the inner structure is right, even the softest tap will ring beautifully. That is you. Individuation is not about becoming louder. It's about becoming clearer, inside and out. And the beautiful part is this: the child you once were holds the map. Her needs, her joy, her sorrow, her instincts, they are the clues. When you listen to her, you are not regressing. You are returning to the place where your soul first learned to feel. And in doing so, you're not going backwards. You are finally moving forward with all of you, not just the parts that got rewarded. So ask yourself today, not how can I improve, but what have I left behind? What part of me is still waiting? And what would happen if I stopped running and simply turned around and said, I remember you, I'm ready now. That, dear soul, is where wholeness begins. Sometimes the theory becomes real, not through words, but through the quiet unraveling of a single life. Individuation stops being a beautiful idea and begins to pulse through the bones, through choices, through tears that have waited for years to fall. That's exactly what happened to Camila, a woman who appeared to have it all, yet lived in a silent drought inside her soul. At 37, Camila was the picture of worldly success. Her resume sparkled. Her name opened doors. She was admired in every boardroom, decisive in every crisis. People looked at her and saw the future, but what no one saw, because she never let them, was the child inside her who hadn't smiled in years. The one who once sang without fear, cried without shame, and dreamed without permission. Carl Jung wrote, "The more civilized we seem to be, the more subtly we repress our natural emotions." Camila was the embodiment of this repression. Her brilliance was real, but so was her exhaustion. Underneath her flawless exterior was a woman cut off from her roots, from her feeling, her softness, her soul. She didn't need more coaching. She needed remembrance. One day, a small thing changed everything. A colleague gave her a book with no inscription, no message, just a title. The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung. Camila opened it late one night, more out of boredom than curiosity. But as she read, something broke open. One sentence struck her with almost unbearable truth. What you resist persists. And just like that, her armor cracked. She realized she had spent decades resisting softness, tears, and uncertainty, fearing they would make her weak. But in doing so, she had also resisted comfort, joy, and belonging. For the first time, she acknowledged, I don't feel safe in my own body. I've been leading a life without ever coming home to myself. Camila began writing each night. At first, it was stiff. I'm tired. I feel cold. I don't want to answer another email. But gradually, the pages softened. Memories surfaced. The day her teacher told her to stop singing. The moment her mother dismissed her tears as weakness. The lonely walks home after school. And with each remembered ache, the wall between her and her inner child thinned. One night, she wrote a sentence that changed everything. Little one, I'm sorry I've been gone so long. And with that, she found herself sobbing for the first time in years. Not with despair, but with release. As if her soul had been holding its breath, and now it could finally exhale. The next morning, Camila didn't check her phone first. Instead, she closed her eyes and imagined herself at 6 years old, sitting on a swing, legs barely reaching the ground. She asked, "What do you need today?" The answer was simple, a hug. And in that moment, Camila wrapped her arms around herself. It may sound small, but to her it was the first time she'd ever truly received comfort from herself. As the weeks passed, Camila's outer life didn't fall apart. It deepened. Her voice became warmer. Her presence more grounded. She no longer rushed to prove herself. In meetings, she allowed pauses. She said, I don't know when needed, and felt no shame in it. Instead of trying to be inspiring, she simply was present. And that presence changed the room. One junior employee told her, I don't know what it is, but since you changed, I feel like I can breathe around you. That single sentence moved Camila more than any promotion or applause ever had, because it was proof that her healing had become a shelter for others. Her wholeness wasn't just her own, it created space for others to return to themselves. Carl Jung wrote, "The reason for evil in the world is that people are not able to tell their stories. Camila's story, once hidden even from herself, had now become her power. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. And in that honesty, she found something the world had never given her: peace. If you've ever felt like you're living in a life that looks good but feels empty, if you've ever wondered why you're so tired even when everything seems fine, Camila's story is your mirror. You are not broken. You are simply being called back to the parts of you that were left behind. And those parts are not gone. They are waiting. You don't need to write a bestseller or take a sabbatical to return. You just need a moment. A pen. A quiet space. A willingness to ask, "Little one, are you okay today?" Even if you don't get an answer, the asking itself is healing. It's how we build trust again, with ourselves. Camila's transformation was not about becoming a new woman. It was about remembering the girl she had silenced. And when she welcomed that girl home, she became something new. Not by force, but by reunion. She became real. And realness, in a world of masks, is magnetic. You don't need to be anyone else to be powerful. You need only to be whole. And the path to wholeness, always, always, begins with the child within. There is a difference between the woman who performs confidence and the one who radiates it. The first knows how to speak with power, how to walk into a room and hold eye contact, but inside, she still seeks permission to be herself. The second does not perform. She simply is, and what sets her apart is not her charisma, but her congruence. She no longer hides the child within. She walks with her. Carl Jung once said that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Real feminine confidence arises not when you become more polished, but when you become more integrated. When the softness you once hid becomes your strength. When your tears become as welcome as your brilliance. When your inner child becomes your ally, not your secret. This is the kind of woman who speaks truth without needing applause, who cries and doesn't apologize for it, who can set boundaries without anger and receive praise without shrinking. She isn't fearless. She simply knows who she is, because she's no longer divided between performance and presence. And when she smiles, it's not for show. It's the echo of a girl inside her who feels safe again. You know this kind of woman when you meet her. She makes you feel seen without trying. She holds eye contact without intimidation. She listens without distraction. And when she speaks, her voice carries something you can't quite name, but you remember it for days. That something is alignment. It's not taught. It's remembered. It comes from within. And here is the secret Jung pointed to. You already have this within you. This radiance is not something you earn. It is your birthright. But to access it, you must journey inward. You must meet the parts you buried, the tears, the longings, the questions, and bring them back into your heart, not to control them, but to love them. Feminine strength is often misunderstood. It is not only found in nurturing or kindness, it is also found in truth, in discernment, in deep stillness. And when the inner child is embraced, she doesn't make you weak. She makes you whole. She softens your voice without silencing it. She slows your steps without dimming your fire. She teaches you to move from intuition, not just from planning. One woman told me that, after months of inner child work, she stopped over-explaining herself. She no longer needed to justify her boundaries. Her no became calm, not combative, and her yes became joyful, not performative. Why? Because the child within no longer feared being abandoned, and so the adult no longer needed to over-earn love. This is the heart of feminine confidence, not walking without fear, but walking with your whole self, knowing that every part of you, from the joyful girl to the wise woman, has a place. There's no more chasing approval. No more shrinking in rooms that weren't built for your soul. You become your own home, your own anchor. And that changes everything. The world doesn't always know what to do with a woman like this. She is unpredictable, not because she's chaotic, but because she listens to herself first. She refuses to be contained by systems that reward conformity. And yet, she is magnetic, because she lives in truth, and truth cannot be copied. It can only be felt. Jung often wrote about the power of the individual soul to shape the world, not through domination, but through presence. When you integrate your inner child, you become this kind of soul, quietly powerful, tender but unshakable. You stop needing to win. You start choosing what aligns. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you trusted your emotions, not as a problem to fix, but as a guide? When did you last let yourself rest, without guilt? Play without purpose, or say, "I don't know," without shame? These small acts are the language of the integrated woman. They are proof that the child is not just remembered, but welcomed. You don't need to explain this to anyone. You don't even need them to understand. The smile that begins to bloom in your chest will speak for you. The calm in your voice, the softness in your step, these will say what words cannot, that you are no longer performing. You are living fully, deeply, freely. And from this place, the world begins to respond differently, not because it changed, but because you did. You're no longer seeking mirrors to validate your worth. You've become your own reflection, clear, warm, and grounded, and that reflection invites others to see themselves more clearly too. This is what happens when a woman stops abandoning her inner child. She becomes luminous, not because she learned how to shine, but because she finally stopped dimming herself. There is a moment, often quiet and unannounced, when a woman realizes she is no longer performing her life. She is living it. Not to impress, not to survive, but simply because she can. That moment is not marked by a victory or applause. It is marked by something far more intimate, the return of her inner child's smile. That smile is not loud. It doesn't ask to be noticed. It rises slowly, like dawn through fog, warm, soft, and utterly real. It carries no explanation, no justification. It simply says, "I feel safe now." And with that, everything changes. Because when the child inside us feels safe, the woman we are becomes unstoppable. Not through force, but through freedom. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And becoming who you truly are is not about chasing the ideal version of yourself. It's about recovering the lost parts, the joyful child, the silenced girl, the dreaming heart, and saying to them with full presence, "You belong here." You don't have to erase the past to be free. You don't have to fix every wound before you're allowed to feel peace. You simply have to show up, day by day, word by word, breath by breath. And every time you choose connection over perfection, softness over shame, presence over performance, you take another step toward wholeness. This is not a linear journey. Some days you will feel deeply connected. Others, you'll forget and fall back into old patterns. That's okay. Healing is not about never falling. It's about remembering faster. It's about returning to yourself over and over with love. Just like a mother returns to a crying child, not with punishment, but with arms wide open. Let me tell you something sacred. Your inner child has never stopped believing in you. Even in the years you ignored her, even in the moments you judged her, she waited. Not in bitterness, but in quiet hope. She knew you would come back. And now that you have, you are no longer just surviving. You are finally living from the center of who you are. There's no formula for this. No 10-step plan. No script to follow. The truth lives in the small, consistent gestures. Putting your hand on your heart when you feel overwhelmed. Asking your younger self what she needs before rushing into another task. Choosing rest when the world demands hustle. Letting your no be as sacred as your yes. One woman, after doing this work for months, said something I'll never forget. I don't feel like a new person. I feel like I finally came home. That is the goal, not transformation into something else, but a return to who you've always been beneath the noise. That is the miracle. That is the integration Jung spoke of. From this place, your confidence will feel different. It won't be brittle. It won't waver when others disapprove. It won't disappear when you're tired, because it's no longer built on outer success. It's rooted in inner safety. It grows from love, not fear, from authenticity, not performance. And you'll begin to notice that others feel it too. People will be drawn to your presence, not because you try to impress them, but because your very being invites truth. You will no longer attract what feeds your ego. You will attract what speaks to your soul, because that's what you now lead with. Let's return once more to that moment. The one where it all begins. A quiet room. A hand over your heart. The question, little one, what do you need today? If you ask that every day, you will never be lost again, because the child within will guide you. She will remind you that freedom is not found in becoming someone else, but in fully loving the one you've always been. So, if today you feel far from yourself, if your smile has felt forced, your voice uncertain, or your spirit heavy, pause. Breathe. Close your eyes. Find that younger version of you. The one in the rain boots. The one with messy hair and wild dreams. Look her in the eyes and whisper, "I'm still here. I remember you. I'll never leave again." Because once she knows you mean it, once her smile begins to rise, you will feel it. The quiet strength, the glowing softness, the rooted grace, that is your true confidence. That is your feminine power. Not loud, not perfect, but whole, holy. And in that moment, you won't need the world to validate you, because you'll finally know what the inner child has known all along. You've always been enough.